Where did it come from originally? I'm kind of interested, like, in the '60s and '70s, for example, in Britain. Now, in America, it's different, but it did happen post 1965 in a way it hasn't happened before in terms of non-European immigration to the United States, which took off after the 1965 Immigration Act. But what were the elites thinking? Were they thinking, "Well, we know that racism is wrong, and so therefore we have to it would be great for us, especially former colonial powers, to actually allow for a more racially diverse society, and that would somehow make us." And then there was this sense in the '90s, for example, with Blair, that there was something positively virtuous about a diversification strategy for a country. And you see that also in Justin Trudeau, for example, in Canada, where you have an aggressive attempt to erase any sense of an ethnic majority to
Mm,
create a truly multicultural state in which the person who has just arrived has absolutely there's no distinction to be made between him and someone might have lived there, their family lived there
mm.
for, hundreds of years.
I mean, I think this is a point that almost marries my two books, The Road to Somewhere and Head, Hand, Heart, in that I think what you're talking about derives, I think, very much from a sort of anywhere. It's somewhere and anywhere, by the way, not somewhere and nowhere. Everyone always calls it nowhere. um, the anywhere worldview is based around openness, mobility, autonomy. Tends to be anti-authority, tends to be anti-tradition. The universities in the Western world are great centres of this worldview, and it's a perfectly understandable worldview for highly educated people. Highly educated people have a kind of interest in the free flow of ideas, and the free flow of ideas kind of spills over into the free movement of people. They tend to have a rather negative view of their own national traditions. And I think it was when this group, you know, sort of coming out of the 60s and the 70s, when this group kind of moved its way through the institutions and came to, like in the Blair era in the UK or in the Clinton era in the US, these values became the dominant values of society. And I think that is, and it was an overshooting of a kind of legitimate liberalism. I think it wasn't, like so many of the things we're talking about are kind of overshoots of one kind or another. And I think,
Well, it's true that certainly in terms of the UK, the sheer pace of immigration in the last 20 years
after 97, yeah, yeah,
after '97,
yeah,
is has been really staggering, and in a way that has never been experienced in Britain before. I mean, it's a staggering thing to me that almost 40% of Londoners were not born in the United Kingdom,
yeah.
which is it's pretty normal for New York City as an
Mm.
entrepot to the vast United States, but for an offshore island, that's a hell of a lot of people showing up,
Yeah,
to be integrated.
absolutely. And the other, so if anywhere's, but anywhere values and somewhere values are both in their mainstream form perfectly legitimate. The problem has been that anywhere values have become over dominant. And also, one of the other aspects of the kind of anywhere worldview that I talk about is that anywheres tend to have what are called achieved identities. I mean, I think it's the U.S. sociologist Tulker Parsons, incredibly boring sociologist. He tried to produce a sort of chemistry textbooks of social of society, but he did come up with this really interesting, useful idea, I think, of the spectrum between achieved and so-called ascribed identities. That's the somewhere people who tend to be, usually, most of our society is still a very large minority, if not a majority, of people who are lots of well educated, unlike the anywheres, and they tend to be more rooted. They tend to prefer security and familiarity to kind of openness and novelty. I mean, these are obviously huge generalizations. They often don't apply at the kind of individual level, but I think they're useful sort of heuristics for thinking about society. But somewheres tend to have ascribed identities, that their identities are based around the things that you can't escape from. You're northern working class male. If your identity is mainly based on ascribed things, you tend to have a stronger connection to commitment to, you might say, to the place you come from and the group you belong to. And
Mhm.
therefore you're much more susceptible to being disturbed when the group you're part of or the place that you come from changes, and becomes unfamiliar to you. So I think that
Mm.
is, again, you don't have to be a nativist to feel that.